Welcome to the Hello Sunday podcast with me, Nikki Hayden. This is the podcast that discusses everything self-development, spirituality and sobriety. And it wouldn't be me without a little sprinkling of humour. Whether you are just starting out on your journey of self-development or have been exploring these topics for years, are completely alcohol-free, or just curious about living a more sober lifestyle, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'll be exploring topics in both solo episodes and with some amazing guest experts. So if you like what you hear, then please subscribe, rate and review. So with that said, let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Hello Sunday. I hope you're all really good. I hope you've all had a really good week. It feels like a hot minute since I was talking to you. I don't really know why. I think it's because I'd got into the habit of recording a little bit earlier than usual, trying to do it on a Sunday, as one of my most recent episodes suggested. I like to kind of get up to speed with what's going on in the week on a Sunday. I like to plan and prep and get things done. And I just started to record my podcast on like a Sunday afternoon stroke Sunday evening, because it was actually a lot easier for me than trying to squeeze it into my full-time job that I work during the week. But actually this week was a little bit different, and do you know what? It's funny how things work out. I'm actually really glad that I've waited and that I haven't tried to squeeze it in at the weekend, because what I'm going to talk about today is only as a result of how I've been feeling this week. And had I have recorded something on Sunday, I probably wouldn't have been in these emotions and it wouldn't have been as fresh. So I wouldn't have been able to really articulate myself and get out there exactly how I'm feeling and how I'm still feeling. And hopefully, like, the words probably wouldn't have had the power maybe and landed as well as they will do now that I'm actually kind of like talking it through in real time. So I hope that makes sense, but it just means that it's been like maybe a week and a half since I recorded, which feels like a really, really long time. But I hope you're all good. Like I say, I hope you've all had a really good week so far. It's been a bit of a weird week for me, I'm not going to lie. I don't know whether maybe I don't sound as kind of, I don't know, upbeat and I guess happy as I normally do. It's funny because I am still like a super happy person. Like, that's just my general demeanor. I normally look on the positive side of things and try and perceive challenges as learning opportunities and growth opportunities. But this last week, I've just had some really heavy, shitty, tough, negative emotions. I've just been feeling like things are really hard, and there's not really a specific thing that I can put my finger on. Well, there isn't. As most of you know, unless you're brand new around here. If you are brand new around here, you might want to go back and listen to another episode first. Just because this one probably isn't going to be the most upbeat and happy, as I said. But it's a really, really important one. And it's, I think, for me, really important that I talk about this stuff now that I'm feeling it, rather than waiting until I've come out of the other side of it completely. And like I say, it probably wouldn't have the same impact. It's easy to quickly forget how you felt in a moment when you're out of it, isn't it? But yeah, if you are new around here, then welcome, but potentially go back and listen to a lighter, brighter episode first. But yeah, for those of you that aren't new, or maybe might know me personally, you'll know that I run my own business, which I launched last year. Now, last year was an incredible year in my business. It launched, and I had maybe 4 or 5 weeks at the start where I didn't have any clients, and then it just absolutely exploded. And even though the recruitment market was meant to be super hard last year, that wasn't my personal experience, and I had a really good year. However, I then took a month off over Christmas, and that was due to a friend's wedding in Vegas and obviously Christmas. And then we went on a holiday that we'd had booked for a while. So it ended up being about a 5-week period where I wasn't fully in the business. And obviously that is going to have an impact. But also coupled with the fact that the recruitment market in the market that I recruit in is really tough at the moment. It is. And I think when you don't have the security and the stability of a salary, and you don't have the team around you, don't get me wrong, I'm super supported, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, but it's just all, it's kind of accumulated in me just feeling a little bit stressed out, a little bit like maybe I need to look at things differently. I'm kind of struggling to see the wood for the trees a little bit. And don't get me wrong, there's been some really good points over the last few weeks, but it's definitely felt like I'm trudging through treacle. So that is kind of the factor in the main factor in why I think that I've been feeling the way that I have. But I think just generally, human emotions are going to be up and down a lot. They are not linear. Nobody's happy all of the time. Nobody is positive all of the time. And this is really what I want to talk about today. It's toxic positivity and learning to embrace and acknowledge and sit with and process those negative emotions. Now, I say negative in inverted commas because actually negative, it depends how you view them, but they're necessary emotions. We all need to experience sadness and grief and fear and anger and all of the emotions that maybe we don't necessarily think are helping us, but they are what form the fabric of the human experience. So we have to feel these emotions. And it's like that analogy of, if there was no dark, we wouldn't appreciate the sunshine. If we didn't have a winter season, we wouldn't appreciate the summer. We have to have, light and shade. We have to have contrast in our lives. But it's sometimes really easy to get sucked into feeling like you're never going to come out of the other side, or you're never going to feel any differently. Now, I also need to caveat the last week with the fact that last weekend, my husband and I were invited to 3 birthday events, all on the same day. And whilst I went to my friend's 40th birthday meal and didn't drink any alcohol, by the time I got to the second birthday party, kind of early evening, I had decided to have a few drinks. Now, I think just the fact that I don't really go out drinking anymore, I never drink in the house. It's just something that has benefited my life so much and been such a positive influence, means that now when I do drink, it really, really affects me, and it makes me feel very low energy and very just kind of not wanting to do a lot for quite a few days. It's not just the day after anymore. It's 3-4 days where I know that my energy is affected. So I think coupled with the struggle and the challenge of my business life at the moment and navigating that has been just a lack of focus on discipline and goals. So I was having a weekend off my fitness and nutrition plan anyway. That was already booked in with my coach. But that then obviously meant that I didn't go to the gym on Monday either. And then I also just didn't really, I was only taking like the supplements that I absolutely needed to. There was 2 days where I didn't take my Simprove gut health supplements, and that's had a knock-on effect. And I just wasn't looking after myself the way that I normally would. And I'm going to do a different episode on this, but actually that then means that for me anyway, and I think probably a lot of you listening will have had this experience, that I lose respect for myself when I'm not being disciplined or not fulfilling my potential. Not necessarily lose respect, but I don't have the same level of respect. I definitely have a lot more respect for myself when I'm showing up and I'm committing and I'm disciplined and I'm getting the hard stuff done. And there was at least 3 or 4 days over kind of Friday to Monday where that didn't really happen. And it's really, really interesting to see how quickly that impacts me and how deeply that impacts me. So what I want to talk about today is we are, especially I think as British people, so for anyone listening from different countries, this, may be applicable to you too, but I think as British citizens, that sounded really formal, didn't it? As the British public, we are very good at kind of like the whole stiff upper lip thing and telling each other to look on the bright side or pointing out that it could be worse. And whilst those phrases are very true, yes, of course, we should be attempting to look on the bright side and look on the positives and take from it the positivity and the gratitude for our lives. For those of you that are regular listeners to the show, or maybe you know me personally, you won't have been able to get away without hearing me talk about Simprove. Simprove is a scientifically backed, water-based probiotic drink. You drink it daily and it has been scientifically proven to help with things like bloating, IBS symptoms, pain. It was actually a dietitian friend of mine that introduced it to me last year, and I honestly wouldn't be without it now. It's helped with my energy, with my bloating, it's helped with my immune system, and also things like my skin. The list is honestly endless. Now, I have got a code for you. So if you'd like to try Simprove, you can get 50%, that's a massive 50% off your first 3-month subscription by going on to simprove.com and putting in the code Nikki50. That's NIKKI50, or clicking the link in the show notes. Pointing out that it could be worse or trying to get someone to look on the bright side or yourself to look on the bright side all of the time, it actually really invalidates the feelings that you're feeling when you're experiencing negative emotions. So you imagine your friend comes up to you and they have just finished a relationship. They've been either broken up with, or they are the one that's doing the breaking up, but they feel really crappy. You probably wouldn't turn around to them and say, oh, well, could be worse, or, oh, look on the bright side. There probably are bright sides if the relationship was a toxic one or wasn't good for them. But you probably listen to them and you probably let them sit in those emotions. You'd probably encourage them to do things to process those emotions. And it's so interesting how we, a lot of the time, won't do that for ourselves. We will try and push down and shove down those negative emotions and those feelings that we don't want to experience, and try and bring about positive emotions by scrolling on social media or doing online shopping or calling a friend and not talking about the issue. Now, I've got to caveat the whole of this with I am not trauma informed. I'm not a trained trauma specialist. I am not a trained psychotherapist. I am not talking in this episode about traumatic emotional experiences I'm not talking about deep-rooted trauma that you've buried down. If you want to look at somebody or be exposed to somebody on social media who is amazing at that stuff, and I'm actually going to try and get her on the podcast as a guest. One of my connections called Self Love Lydia, she her Instagram handle is selflove.lydia. She is a somatic psychotherapist. She is trauma trained, and she talks a lot about deep-rooted trauma in the body, how to process it, and all of that sort of stuff. The emotions that I'm talking about on this episode are if you've just had a bit of a shit week, or you're angry because you got passed over for a job interview, or you're disappointed, or your friend said something to you that's like irked you a bit. I'm talking about the sort of emotions where they can piss you off for a few days, but you know, you're not losing sleep over them. So whilst positivity is really important, and it's a really good thing to be able to, I guess, kind of align with and be able to tune into, you need to have the balance, and you need to be able to allow yourself to acknowledge and sit with, and then once you've had the opportunity to sit with, process negative emotions. A really good example of this is, like, I used to have a boss who, whenever I would have an issue or a challenge in my job, I would speak to them, and their response would be, I mean, like, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, but I think probably 10 times out of 10, would be something along the lines of, oh, don't worry, it will work itself out. Or, oh, it'll get better, don't stress. They very, very rarely offered up any advice or anything really useful to help me navigate those challenges. It was always just toxic positivity, essentially. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for reassuring people. If something is really menial and you can tell that it's just 100% not worth worrying about, like, you know, something really small, then of course that reassurance and that guidance is great. But actually, when somebody's coming to you with a challenge that they're struggling to navigate, or an emotion that they're feeling very strongly, actually just, I guess, glossing over the root cause of it is not helpful. It's toxic positivity at its core. So you need to be able to understand when other people are feeling this way and acknowledge that. But actually, you know, just as importantly, if not more importantly, you need to be able to recognize this in yourself, and you need to be able to have in place like tactics and ways of dealing with it, and ways of kind of like drawing out, what is it that I'm feeling, and what do I need, and how do I need to deal with it? Because otherwise you just push it down, and it always comes back up. It will always find a way. You know, you don't, unless you process an emotion, it just stays with you. And this is, again, something that is massively rooted in somatic therapies and working with processing deep traumas, is the idea that the body and mind connection is so deep, and they are so intrinsically connected, that if you have an emotion that you just continue to push down, that eventually it will come out physically somehow. There's a really amazing book called The Body Keeps the Score, if you want to read more on that. And this is all the work that Self-Love Lydia that I was talking about earlier, that's what she specialises in. But on a really smaller level, on a much less deep level, if you're feeling anger towards a situation and you just try and gloss over that, or you numb out to just try and get yourself in a better mood, you might achieve that better mood, but eventually somewhere down the line, maybe the next thing that angers you won't warrant the response that you give it, but because you hadn't already processed the anger that you were feeling, that's exactly why you've had this massive blow up at something really small and actually, a completely out of proportion reaction. And that's exactly what I've been feeling this week. Things have just irritated me, and stuff that should never, ever have been, a problem or made me feel pissed off or angry. It has done, and it has done in a massive way. And that's how I know that there's things that I am not, or hadn't, I should say, acknowledged and therefore processed. So, how can you go about doing this? It's all very well saying you need to do this, but what are kind of some of the steps? What are the ways that you can go about making sure that you understand what it is that you're feeling, and how can you go about processing it? So, recognizing it, recognizing the emotion, recognizing the state, recognizing and naming what it is that you're feeling is the first thing. You can't get rid of, well, maybe you can on some level, but you can't truly get rid of an emotion unless you understand what that emotion is. So it might be that actually, let's just say you've failed your driving test and you're really disappointed, you're really pissed off. When you actually get underneath the root of that emotion, it might not be anger or disappointment that you're feeling really at all. That might be how you're showing the emotion, or how it is being portrayed. But actually what you might be really feeling is fear. You might be feeling fear that you won't ever pass your driving test. You might have a fear that you're not good enough to pass your driving test. And it will normally always come down to a belief about yourself or about the world around you. So for me this week, the feelings of I've just been consistently ghosted, not communicated to properly within my business. I've had people drop out last minute. And because it's my business, and because I'm building up that brand, and it's me representing, essentially myself to these clients, when I looked underneath the emotion, the anger and the kind of the frustration that I've been feeling this week has all been rooted in a fear of failure and a fear of not being good enough, despite all the evidence that showed me that last year that I made a success of this business, and the last 15 years in recruitment, I've never had what I would call a really terrible year. Even during COVID, I did really well. So all of that evidence, you would think that it would be easy to just say, oh, it's fine, it will all work out, it'll be okay. But actually that fear, that deep-rooted fear of failure and fear of not being good enough is there. Now that may not have come from work. In fact, it's very probable that it never ever came from work in the first place, that it's not a work-based fear. It didn't develop in a work-based context, but actually other areas in my life where I've been made to feel not good enough, or, for instance, when I had my first marriage that broke down because of adultery, and there's little things that throughout all of the experiences that you've had that you will be holding on to memories of, and you'll be holding on to how they made you feel, that then other things can trigger, other experiences can trigger that emotion in you, and it makes you immediately go back to that place. So the work-based stuff for me is probably actually very, very little to do with how I've been feeling, but it's triggered in me an emotion that then I've started feeling in my body, and it's just grown and grown and grown as the week has gone on. So understanding really the root cause and the experience of where that emotion has come from is really important to trying to process it and trying to find out the best way to deal with it, and to make sure that you can try and get rid of it. So name it, respond to it. So response will be normally in like the way of self-expression. So ask yourself, like, what do I need right now? If you're feeling super angry, if you're feeling super pissed off, maybe you just need to go and scream into a pillow and punch a pillow. If you're feeling, I don't know, really confused about a situation, maybe journaling on it or venting to a friend, which isn't the same as asking for advice, by the way. Venting just means asking somebody for 5 or 10 minutes where you can just talk at them. And then whether or not you want a solution or advice is completely up to you with how you feel afterwards. You don't have to have advice given just because you vented, but you do need to make sure that the person who you're venting to is in the right mental place and emotional place to be able to take that on. I've got people in my life that won't ask that question and they'll just rant at me regardless, and it's quite overwhelming. And then I've got other people in my life where it's just a unwritten rule that exchange can happen because we always have that space and that time for each other because of how the relationship works. So make sure you're picking the right friend, but also make sure that you're asking them, look, I've got this issue, I need to vent. Do you mind if I have that? Have you got space? It might be that if you are just feeling like really up in your head about something, or you haven't got, like, you feel like you've got no mental space to process it, but you might just want to go for a walk, or you might want to do some yoga. Dance and movement is absolutely incredible in processing emotion out of your body. A lot of the time things will just get stuck in the body, especially if you haven't given yourself the time to try and process them. Maybe it was during the workday and you've had to like push down how you feel because you're in the office, and by the time you get home, you're just like, oh, just frustrated and horrible. Dancing or moving then can help to like move that emotion through the body. And it's a really, really good, I guess just like quite an uplifting way to process. Like me and my husband have got this thing that if one of us is feeling a bit shitty, we will put on a really uplifting song and we'll just say, can we have a living room dance? And we'll both just go nuts and just dance how we feel. The other way that people quite often will suppress themselves from processing emotion is crying. Now, crying is such a natural human thing to do. We wouldn't have tear ducts if we weren't meant to cry. We wouldn't have a way of releasing tears if we weren't meant to release them from the body. Whether that is in sadness, whether it is in happiness, whether it's in frustration or anger, crying is a way of releasing that emotion. So if you feel like you need to cry, it's not a weakness. It's not something that should be suppressed. And it really gets to me when you might be on a night out, or you might be just somewhere in like a public environment and someone will be crying. It happens a lot with kids as well. And I'll quite often see the parent or the friend or whoever saying, oh, don't cry, don't cry. And I get that they're doing it with the best of intentions, but actually it's not helpful, because it's almost saying to that person, don't express your emotion, don't express your emotion. And just because it's a negative emotion, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be expressed. Obviously in the right ways, like you can't go punching people in the street, but it needs to come out. And actually I'd argue that if it's a negative emotion, it's probably all the more important that it does come out, because those are the emotions that are going to come out eventually physically and cause illnesses, cause headaches, cause hair loss, cause jaw ache. When I was in a previous relationship, not with my ex-husband actually, although it's a miracle that this didn't happen with him, but it was a very, very toxic and emotionally abusive relationship. And I was scared to admit to people what was really going on. I was scared to admit to myself what was really going on. And so for a long time, I pushed down the negative emotions. I was actually going to a therapist at the time as well to try and process it all. And he even said to me, I think unless you get out of this relationship, there's no point in you keep coming to see me, because we're not actually processing anything, because every time we do, it's just happening again. It's like a vicious cycle. And during the course of those really, really, really bad months, I had hair loss. I was picking the skin around my thumbs to the point that it was bleeding with anxiety. I lost weight. I was ill to the point of like constant like tonsillitis infections and stuff. And generally just super, super physically unwell and not good. It was just all the emotion, the act of pushing down negative emotions and constantly being in that state of fight or flight meant that my cortisol levels were raised so high for such a long period of time that it was causing inflammation in my body that was making me ill, essentially. It was making me really poorly. So I've seen firsthand exactly how this can manifest itself, how it can happen, and really the dangers of doing that. And unfortunately for me, I'm in a fantastic, loving, safe relationship now where that is not even a factor. But, you know, there are things in life where you're still going to experience negative emotions, even if it's not to that degree. And so being able to process them is super important. So punching a pillow, screaming, as long as it's not in earshot of your neighbours, they might end up calling the police, crying, venting to a friend, journaling, dancing, or just movement generally, just shaking it out, you know, as Taylor said, shake it off. But it's true, you know, shaking your body, getting just movement into you can help to rid you of emotion and rid you of things that you just don't want to feel. Yoga, there's a lot of kind of theory and probably a lot of science, actually. I've not looked into it too much, around a lot of emotion being stored in the hips. So you can do hip opening exercises. And I've been in yoga classes where we've done hip exercises and people have broken down in tears. You know, they've just had a complete and utter release. Walking. And then I think, you know, we really do have to mention that if you do feel like it is something that is just constantly burdening you and you're not able to process it in some of the mentioned ways, then going to therapy. You know, there's absolutely no stigma with going to therapy. We go to the gym to work out physically and build our physical muscles. So going to therapy is the same thing for our mental muscles and to process emotions. I've got friends that have been in therapy for years and they just use it as a sounding board and that kind of advice and guidance from somebody who's not going to have toxic positivity, and they're not just going to tell you to look on the bright side. Then following the response part of the process and the self-expression and understanding what it is that you need and getting those emotions processed, it's about resetting then. So we've got recognize the emotion and name it, respond to it, and then reset. And the reset part is probably one of the most important steps that a lot of people will tend to miss out, because they'll get rid of the emotion and then they'll think, well, I feel okay again now, or I feel happier now. But resetting is about self-care and about realignment. So looking at the activities and the things that you would normally do to get back into feeling like yourself again, to get back in alignment with your highest potential and your highest self. So whether that is just, you know, having a bath and feeling calm and meditated, or whether it's maybe going to the gym if you've been neglecting that part of your life, whether it's just going out with friends and going for a lunch or a nice dinner and just reconnecting. A lot of the time when we're feeling into our negative emotions, we will shelve those activities, or we won't continue to participate in those activities in the same way that we would do when we're feeling our best selves. So actually making sure that you are re-engaging in self-care activities, whatever that might look like to you, and realigning yourself to your highest version of you is really important. And for me, that looks like going back to the gym. It looks like taking my supplements again. It will be speaking to friends that maybe I haven't given as much time to over the last few days because I haven't wanted to burden them. And just getting back to that normal routine that I mentioned at the beginning, that I feel gives me that respect for myself, the discipline and the consistency, and just showing up for myself, essentially. And I think it is important to say that, you know, there's people in my life, normally the older generations, who didn't have access to this education. They didn't understand mental health like we do. And they do tend to say things quite a lot like, oh, come on, you know, it could be worse, or, oh, think of all the, followed by, you know, children in Gaza or Ukraine. And of course, my heart goes out to those people, but it doesn't take away how valid your own feelings and emotions are. And so if that you have got people around you saying things like that, just try and, I guess, sympathize with maybe where they're coming from. If they are from a different generation, if they are people that maybe didn't have access to or have never come into contact with mental health and self-development education. And then I think using that on the flip side, how can we be better friends, better family members? How can we help to create an environment where our friends and our family and those close to us can actually navigate negative emotions really, really in a positive way, can process them and can release them? And how can we be that sounding board and that guidance for them? So maybe when somebody tells you that they're feeling a certain way, asking a question like, would you like a listening ear? Would you like some advice? Or would you just like to go for a walk? Maybe, have you tried this? Not just flipping back onto them, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, or don't cry. Know that we've all done this before. I've done this before. But it's not helpful in a situation where somebody needs to vent or they need to just be given that space. You know, you can hold space for people without necessarily having to even give any advice if you haven't got anything, you know, any experience in what they're experiencing. So I hope that's been useful, and yeah, I hope I've not been too much of a Debbie Downer. I'm good. Honestly, I'm good. I think it's just so important to highlight the fact that regardless of being absolutely knee deep in this self-development work and reading all the books and listening to all the podcasts and absolutely loving what I do, that I have the same emotions. I have the same down days and weeks and experience the negativity that everyone does. And sometimes I don't remember how to process it. Sometimes I do wallow in it. And, you know, I'm sure there's friends of mine this week that have thought, oh my God, like, you need to just make a plan and try and navigate this and stop whining and going on about it. So I am just as guilty as everybody else. And I think sometimes it's important to just remember that we're all human, we're all experiencing these emotions, and we are all just trying to do the best with what we've been given and the knowledge and the education that we have access to. Please go and give the podcast a follow. There's still tons of you listening who don't follow. So please do that. It really does help, and it means that you will never miss an episode again. And don't forget to share on your socials, all of that good stuff. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks for listening. You can find us on Instagram at HelloSundayPod, or you can email us on hellosundaypod@outlook.com. Have a great week.